And we've had a good investigation of a couple of reasons that Tsongkapa's, Nagarjuna and the Budapalita has brought out. So this is in the middle of page 12 in my text anyway. Now that which is arising does not arise. Yeah. So this is the if you had an outline and you know, like a Tsongkapa type of, you know, precise dividing up the text into sections and different arguments, like he likes to do in his commentaries. This is, you know, refuting of arising by refuting it in each of the three times, past, present, and future. So we're still on the refutation of arising. You know, the lasting and ceasing is yet to come. So we're still on this one, but these arguments will repeat. You know, these arguments will be kind of brought out again for the last two features, the last two kind of, you know, qualities, characteristics of the conditioned phenomena. So they're not very well spelled out here, as we said, because they've come up in earlier chapters. So here they're just repeating them. We haven't studied those earlier chapters, so I tried to go back and pick up the arguments and found them very fascinating. But, you know, this one we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks is a little bit, leaves me with a little bit of a puzzle. So that was the argument about, okay, so it's not so difficult to see there's no arising in the past, yeah? Something that has arisen, no arising there. And there's something that's not yet begun to arise, but maybe the causes and conditions made it there, but they haven't sort of become sort of started to interact. Yeah, you've got the eggs, you've got the frying pan, you've got the oil, you've got the gas cooker, but nothing's happening. Nobody's decided to make an omelette, not even an intention. So that's the omelette has not yet arisen. Sorry, not yet. So that's, you know, it's still, that's the future. The causes and conditions are there, but they haven't begun to sort of interact. So it's not too hard to say there's no arising in the future. You know, there's no arising in something that hasn't yet begun to arise, or in the past. But surely it's that which is arising. You know, there's where you'll find the arising. Something which is arising in the present. You know, it started off, and it's not yet come to you know, its completion. It's not yet come to the point where it is come into existence. So that's the one where, you know, the most arguments are required. So here we've got two arguments, and another one coming on in the next verse, or the next 2 or 3 verses, another argument, which is we've already touched on, but here's like it becomes more, comes to the sort of comes to the front of the stage, and it comes to prominence in the next few verses. But so we've actually got 3 main arguments, but 2 there are to this verse, and 1 just still to come in the next verses. And the first one here was, there's no arising in the present. I'll read what Budapalita says. Now, that which is arising does not arise due to the non-existing of arising apart from the arisen and the unarisen. Okay, so we've had a fair old crack at that one, so I'm not going to go back over it, but just remember, you know, you take one of my examples from before then, something like the scarf, and person knitting a scarf. So that's yeah, so whichever way, however you look at it, it does seem that you've got to admit that so where's the bit of the scarf that's actually arising then? You know, you said the scarf's arising. Well, indeed, the scarf itself, but it is half arisen and half not arisen. If we remember my example, you know, you've got 3 sections. You finish the blue section, in the middle section is yellow or something. So that one is you're in the middle of that one, and the last section, which you haven't started yet, which is red. But you can say, oh well, I'm knitting the scarf, can't you? But when it boils down to it, what do you mean? Well, it's like half of it is knitted and half of it is not knitted. So where's the bit that's actually being knitted? You know, where's the bit that's being knitted now? where's the bit that's arising now? So then you say, oh, well, there's a yellow bit in the middle. I've finished the blue bit and I haven't started the red bit, but the yellow bit I'm doing now, the middle bit at the start. Yeah, so that sounds very convincing. But you say, okay, so which bit of the, show us the bit you're actually knitting and within that yellow bit. So what they're going to do then, they say, well, I'm knitting this row now, you know. So you're halfway across in a row. So you've knitted half the row and the other half of the row is not knitted yet. So you can say I'm knitting the row from the perspective of the fact that there's half of it you've finished and half of it you've not finished. So half of it is done and half of it is not done. So where's the bit you're actually doing? So then you say, well, it's this stitch here right now, this stitch, right? So I'm not very good at knitting, but you know, you put your needles together or something, and then you wind the wool around the needles. I just remember how my mum used to do it. And somehow you slip the needles to make a kind of a stitch, like a knot. So you can say, well, you've crossed the needles and you've wound the thread around the needles, but you haven't made the stitch yet. You haven't made the knot. You haven't tied the wool together or something. So again, you've got a stitch that's half done and half not done. So, you know, whatever you do, it's like you're positing that which is arising on something which is half arisen, half not yet arisen. So yeah, it's true. It seems to be true what Nagarjuna and Budapalita are saying. So it's kind of you're got to impute the act of arising onto something half done, half not done. So that it's like arising is more like, you know, something that's happening from the perspective of your mind, and it's not coming from the side of the object, which is, you know, it's really puzzling that. Whether you take something as small as a stitch or something as big as a scarf, it's just the same. You know, like it's half finished, half done, half not done. And it's on the basis of that you can say that something is, you know, being knitted or arising. So you say, oh, but the arising bit, that's included in the unarisen, isn't it? Right? Yeah. So the arisen bit's not arising, but within the unarisen, there's some bit which is arising now. It hasn't yet begun to arise. The red bit hasn't yet begun to arise, the red bit of the scarf, because you haven't even bought the red wool yet. You haven't even been to the shop and got the wool. But the yellow bit, you know, you've got the wool and the wool's on the needles, you know, and the fingers are working. So it says, yeah, but the yellow bit is arising now, you see. It's within the unarisen. It's this, the last bit of the yellow is within the unarisen, but it is arising all the same. But when you say, well, show us the bit that's arising, then well, you come down to something that's finished and something that's not yet finished. You know, so there's the present kind of, you know, is from the side of the object. It's very hard to find. It's unfindable, like, you know, you can't find the body amongst the parts of the body, for instance. Is it like that? You know, you can't find the present, the arising, kind of, you know, inherently there, you know, sort of kind of identifiable, separate from the unarisen and the finished arising. It's like you've got to impute it just onto whatever section you take of something finished and not yet finished. So, as I say, I can't go further than that, and that's just repeating what we've done. So I think we've had a good think about that. I haven't got to the bottom of it myself. You know, with lamp and illumination, remember the lamp and illumination? I felt when I went through it with you again, I kind of you know, figured it out a bit better. And you know, I can write a note on that when I've got time. I haven't got much time at the moment. You know, so I felt that lamp and illumination, I cracked that bit. So I can try and explain that again when I write a note. But this one, still a bit of something to think about. I've not really had time to do that. So we go on to the next argument. So this one is in the same paragraph that we've just read part of. So, and because it follows that there will be two arisings, one in consequence of which it becomes the arising, and one in consequence of which it is said to arise. Okay, so there's the same paragraph in the middle of page 12. Two arguments. Now we're on to the second argument. And like we said, there's not much in the text on this one. what comes underneath is more relevant to the first argument about no arising apart from the arisen and the unarisen. So this is more like a kind of a teasing few remarks about that. So we can't get any help from the text here. So how to understand this idea that there would be two arisings, one in consequence of which it becomes the arising, and one in consequence of which it is said to arise. So that's going to go to the note for that one, to the back of the book, because we have some quotes and maybe from previous chapters where this has been explained in more detail. Yeah, so there are going to be two arisings. What does that mean? So we better go to the note then. So that's on page 30 and note number 3. With regard to verse number 4, there is no arising of 3 times. Why there is no presently arising, if you grasp it in being. And the second reason for that is there would be two arisings. So Budapalita in his commentary, which I've just quoted, starts off the this is okay, the second of the two reasons then. So this, it could be tricky, this one. Again, it's like hard to get your mind around if you've never heard it before. But it relates to this one about the walker, the act of walking, and the place where you're walking. Yeah, or as it is in Nagarjuna, it's going, isn't it? So there's the goer, the agent, and then there's the act of going that the agent does, and then there's the place that's being gone on. So you have those three, and they're all, we're familiar with the 3 circles, yeah, and none of those are inherently existent. So it's like that. But any action you take is the same, like the eater, the act of eating, and then what is being eaten. So the object of the action. So those 3. So it relates very much to that. So in fact, it's not really quite so incredibly strange, but it is, the way Nagarjuna and Budapalita put it, it made me think for ages, what on earth are they getting at, when you're trying to decipher it from Tibetan, all these different ways of saying going, gone, and yet to be gone, and the goer, and that which is gone on, sort of trying to figure all that out in a foreign language is quite complicated. But, well, let's see how we got on now. So, my note says, for those who grasp at inherent existence, it is impossible to present a coherent account of an action going on in the present. Yeah, so that's what they're trying to deny. These, this is what they're refuting, Nagarjuna and Budapalita. It sounds like they might be refuting going altogether. They're refuting arising altogether. But when Tsongkhapa comes on the scene, he says, what they're refuting is ultimate, ultimately existent or inherently existent arising, inherently existent going. So he kind of gives a bit more emphasis to the conventional side. Anyway, the second reason is follows. When, for instance, a seed meets with moisture, warmth, and so on, it begins to swell and sprout. At that point, there is an arising sprout going through the action of arising. So if you look at Purvachok, Middling Dudra, the cause and effect chapter, he kind of sort of eliminates arising a sprout. He says there's no such thing as a sprout, as an arising sprout. But here I am saying there is an arising sprout because you find Tsongkhapa using the phrase. So what exactly do we mean by that then? So what do you say, Thomas? Is he there?
Yeah.
I always ask you, Thomas. We've had the question before, so you've probably got an answer now. So it follows there is such a thing as an arising sprout.
What?
So there's nothing, there's no such thing as an arising sprout.
Except
It follows there is no such thing as an arising sprout. Because
at the time of sprout has arisen. And at the time of the arising of sprout is not yet arisen. That's it.
so at the time of sprout, there's no action of arising of sprout going on, did you say?
Yeah, except.
Yeah. And the time of the arising of sprout, there's no sprout. Is that what you said? Can you hear me, Thomas? Can you hear me, Thomas? Thomas!
It's frozen.
So yeah, I froze that. I didn't hear any of that stuff.
Were you frozen?
Yeah, well,
Yeah. So what Thomas is saying then, that there's no common locus of arising and sprout then. What are you saying, Thomas?
except yeah.
Yeah, so you think if there's an arising sprout, it would have to be a common locus of being a sprout and arising. So do you think there's such a thing as an arising sprout, Hanneli?
Let's say yes.
Follows there isn't such a thing as an arising sprout because there is nothing which is on the one hand arising and a sprout.
No pervasion.
Okay, so how do we understand arising sprout then?
Well, there is something which is arising, which will later be called a sprout when the arising is done.
Yeah, so I think that's the way Tsongkhapa uses it. Something which, when it has arisen, you know, when the arising process is finished, then it will be a sprout. It doesn't mean it is a sprout while it's arising. So, you know, if you remember, if you look at Purvishok's collected topics, he kind of says, oh, there's no such thing as an arising sprout, but he means there's no such thing which is a common locus of arising and a sprout, because when it's arising, there's no sprout there. And when it is a sprout, there's no arising. And if I think to be a common base, common locus of two things, they have to be simultaneous. So that's another question you can debate, you see. If it's a common locus of a common base of two things, do they have to be simultaneous to existence? Which I've raised this point before. Maybe you remember that, I don't know. Otherwise, you can say there's a common locus of a girl who's 15 and a girl who's 16, yeah? Susan, yeah, Susan, one time she was 14 or 15, and the next year after that, she's age 16. So if you say, well, Susan it doesn't have to be, when it's a common basis, the two don't have to be simultaneous, then you can say Susan, it follows she's a common locus, a common basis of being both 15 and 16 then. Which, you know, it doesn't seem very comfortable to accept that. At one time she is 15, another time she's 16, but so yeah, work that one out. But if you go like Hanneli says, yeah, so there's an arising sprout because there is something which is going through the act of arising, which when it's finished arising will be a sprout. And we can say that, we can impute, yeah. But the graspers of inherent existence, it's not so easy for them to hold that position. But that's not this argument, that's kind of coming up. Okay, so we've got something which is arising, which when it finishes arising will be a sprout. And we're able to say then that the agent, the sprout that is arising, okay, so every action's got to have an agent, even if the agent isn't there until the end of the action. But again, that's okay for us because, you know, we can just impute, look, that's what's happening. Well, there's a sprout arising, you know, it's in our own estimation, our own perspective, our own understanding, you know, our own experience, we can say that. We're not insisting there's a sprout inherently doing the act of arising, so that's not our problem, that's somebody else's problem. Okay, so there's the agent, the sprout that is arising, which Budapalita calls the arising. In its phrase at the top of the and in the quotation. Two acts of arising, one in consequence of which it becomes the arising. So it is the sprout in this case, yeah. So it is arising, and you know, that means there's the action of arising going on for it, yeah. So that's one act of arising. And then there's the action which it is performing, the action of arising, which Budapalita refers to as the one in consequence of which it is said to arise. Yeah. So what do we mean here? Well, you've got two things. You've got the sprout, which is doing the arising, the agent, and then you got the action arising. Somebody going in your room to steal everything. The nun's room. Really? I don't think there are any nuns left at this time of night. Well, somebody's using it as a bedroom. Oh, okay. Sorry, just interrupted myself there. Yeah. So you've got two things. You've got the sprout, which is doing the arising, and the action of arising. Conceptually, different, right? The sprout is, you know, kind of that squishy thing that arises out of the seed. That's some sort of form, right? But the action of arising is different, isn't it? The action of arising is a bit more, you know, it's that thing, the action which the object is doing. So you wouldn't say, you can't equate the two. You can't say the sprout is the action of arising. And you can't say the action of arising of sprout is the sprout. Yeah, you've got to keep them separate in your mind. Conceptually distinct, yeah, different isolates and all that. By way of entity, are they the same entity? Walker and the act of walking, is it that they sound, are they the same entity? Yeah, same nature? Simultaneous? One depending on the other, simultaneous? Sounds like the same entity to me. But the sprout and its arising, maybe you wouldn't say they're the same entity, because it's the arising is special. The arising comes before, doesn't it? And then the sprout comes after. So it sounds like they're more like not simultaneous. So what you wouldn't really say they're the same entity. They have to be like separate in time, maybe cause and effect. I don't know, but related anyway. One dependent on the other. Like Walker and the act of walking is slightly easy to think about, because there's not this sort of this dodgy time question. Oh, the sprout doesn't exist at the time of its own arising, so what's going on, you know? But Walker and the act of walking is a bit easier, isn't it? So you've got two things like conceptually separate, like the walker and the act of walking. Okay, we know that they're the same entity. We know that, you know, they never happen apart. You know, you can't separate them like to the eye consciousness. One appears, the other will not appear in a different place. It will not appear separately. You know, the act of walking will appear where the walker is. You know, the walker will be the one who's like, you know, showing the action, the motion of walking. So they're not, for eye consciousness, they won't be separate. For eye consciousness, they won't be distinct. We're tempted to say they're the same nature. But if they are inherently existent, then the whole picture is different, isn't it? Because if they're inherently existent, the walker has got to be walker by way of their own power. So it should have its own separate nature from the act of walking. And the act of walking should exist by way of its own power. So the act of walking wouldn't depend upon the walker. That would have to be in the nature of the act of walking just by itself. Yeah. So that begins to seem like, you know, the walker's got to have their own way of being a walker within the nature of the walker. You know, but then so that's like the walker's got to have his own action of walking within his own nature somehow. But then if you admit that the walker and the act of walking are different, you know, then on the other side, you've got to have the act of walking, which exists without depending on the walker. The act of walking has got to exist inherently. It's got to be there by way of its own power, independent of any walker. So then that's why he's saying there's two walkers. Sorry, that's why he's saying there's two actions of walking. There's one by which the walker becomes the walker, and one, and then the act of walking is sort of separate from him, inherently separate from him, that he's actually doing something. So you've got to have two actions of arising, you see, one in consequence of which the sprout becomes the arising, and one in consequence of which it is said to arise. But they're making a sort of tricky kind of distinction. Once the two, the walker and the walker, are inherently existent, how is the walker a walker? Well, there must be some act of walking there within the walker that makes him the walker. But the act of walking that we kind of identified separate from the walker, that's got to be an act of walking by way of its own power too. So you end up having two actions of walking, he says. How is the walker a walker? By way of its own power. So there must be some walking going on within the walker. But then we've got this act of walking over here. So you say that exists by way of its own power too. So there's an act of walking there. So you've got two acts of walking. So that's the argument. So I'm going to read the next paragraph in the text from my note. In the case where all phenomena are held to be inherently existent, the two phenomena here would each have to have their own separate natures. So that's the arising, which is the sprout, the one doing the arising, and the action of arising. That means that the arising sprout would have to have its very own action of arising within itself somehow. And then there would also be the inherently established action of arising that is separate from it, i.e. there would be two acts of arising. So this is not tenable because there is in fact only one act of action of arising going on, involving one sprout. Two acts of arising would then imply two agents, two arisers, both performing the action of arising, which is not the case here. There's only one sprout doing one action of arising. Yeah. So once you say the arising, the one that's doing the arising, the sprout, and the action of arising are inherently existent, then they have to be separate. So then that's where the problem begins. But it's not like that at all, is it? Really, you think about the walker and the act of walking. How does somebody become to be a walker? Because you see him doing the action of walking. So he's a walker then. Either he's doing it now, or he does it every day, or he's like it's his habit or something. It's a sort of his hobby. But if he's doing it now, you see, by him doing that action, you say he's a walker. And the other way around too, If there's an act of walking going on, there's got to be a walker doing it. There wouldn't be an act of walking unless there was a walker doing it. So they're completely dependent upon each other. They're completely like a sort of a pair of mutually dependent phenomena. So there's no question of anything being inherently existent. It's impossible. But if you say they are inherently existent, then you've got to separate them. So each has got to have this power of walking on their own, independent of the other. So then you've got two powers of walking, two actions of walking. So it all becomes a bit of a mess. So where do we get this argument kind of put forward in this particular text? If not in this chapter, where does it come from then? And it's actually found in the chapter on chapter 2, examination of the gone on, the not gone on, the being gone on. So no going in the three times, right? That's what that chapter is trying to prove. No going in any of the three times, past, present, or future. So when it comes to there's no going in the present, then they use the same argument about if there were going in the present and the inherent existence, then there would have to be two goings. But the way the verses I picked out here are slightly different from the one I've just tried to explain. Slightly different. We'll see what the difference is when we read it. So the fault of there being two actions where there should only be one is disclosed in detail in chapter 2, examination of the gone on, not gone on, and the being gone on. So taking verse number 5 from that chapter, the being gone on possessing going. If you say that, where is the action of going? It's not in the past. It's not on the part of the road that's been gone on. Piece part of the road that's been gone over. There's no going there. That's behind me now. Finished. Ahead of you. But that's not yet gone on, right? So the bit of road ahead of you, that's not gone on. So there's no question of any going there. You haven't got there yet. But there is a bit of the road that is being gone on now, somebody says. So that's what we're asking now. So we did try to deny now going, the action of going in the present. So you've got a bit of a road that's being gone on, you say, that's the bit you're going on now. That's the bit of the road that possesses going. That's where the going is taking place. But if somebody claims that, and the inherently existent lower schools types, the being gone on possessing going, it follows then there'll be two goings, the one through which it's being gone on, and that which is the going on it. There is a path which is being gone on, a person going on it, and an action of going. This verse focuses on the first and the last of these three factors. Tom Carver's commentary, a proponent of inherent existence, says, yeah, so the difference is here, I think that chapter is very thorough. I haven't, read it all or translated it all, but the bit that relates to us from the way where we've been coming from in the first couple of paragraphs of this note, we're talking about the agent doing the arising and the action of arising. So it's the agent and the action, person and the action of going that they're doing, or the sprout and the action of arising that it's doing. But this verse, the Tom Carver's little explanation here is actually more about the place that's where the going is supposed to be happening. So the path where the going is happening, and the action of the going on that path. So they're not so much interested in the agent. It does come up in the chapter, but it's not the bit that I found and made sense of. So of those three, when we talk about the three circles, of the person and the action, and then somehow the object of the action. So it could be like, the eater, the action of eating, and what you're eating, the thing that you're actually eating. But with a verb like going, it's a bit different. It's like or arising. It's the action, the action itself, and the place where it's happening. So those three all require each other. And so we're taking, not so much worried about the person, but we're taking the place where the going is supposed to happen and the action of going. But it's the same thing, you see. So we're taking, instead of taking the first, we're just taking a different two out of those three. We're just selecting a different two. But it's the same argument. So in Tom Carver's commentary, proponent of inherent existence says, the action of going is within in the meaning of both phrases, being gone over and going. So he says, yeah, I'll accept that, being gone over, which is the road, right? The part of the road that's being gone over. So, yeah, I'm accepting, the challenge. I will say there are two goings. The being gone over, the road which is being gone over. In order to be the road which is being gone over, there has to be an action of going there. Yeah. But then, this inherently separate action of going also has to exist in its road, in its own right, by itself, without reference to anything else. But then he says the action of going is he's saying like there's double action of going. Then there's one action of going to make the being gone over, the place where going is happening, and then there's going to be another going, the going which is taking place on that. Somebody's trying to accept there are two goings, in other words. It follows then that for opponent there would be two actions of going. One action of going by which the path acquires the appellation being gone over, and two, the action of going by which the person goes on the path. So the person, is trying to say, well, there are two actions, what's wrong with that? But there's plenty wrong with that. What fault? Verse number 6. then if what follows is two goings, two goers will there be as well. For in the absence of a goer, no going would be tenable. It's the fault they come back with, Nagarjuna comes back with, if you do accept there are two goings, one going identify the road as the thing that's being gone over, and another going, which is the action sort of inherently different from it, then if you accept two actions of going, you've got to accept two goers, two agents. Two actions require two agents. But obviously there aren't two agents, there's only one person doing the going in this kind of scenario. So this is Tsongkhapa's comments, not Budapalita. I think if there were two actions of going, this fault would follow that there would be two persons as goers. The reason is because in the absence of the supporter goer, the supported an action of going is not tenable. Yeah, so if you want an action of going to be taking place, it has to be a goer. And if there's two inherently existing, different actions of going, then there will be two goers. An action depends for its accomplishment on either an object or an agent, and this action rests with the agent. Therefore, it is not tenable to say that the being gone on inherently possesses an action of going. So that's the challenge, to get your mind around that, yeah? If the walker and the act of walking are inherently distinct, then the walker has an action of going, making him a walker, and the action of going, which is, the thing that he does is sort of inherently separate, so that's there as well. So you've got two actions of walking. And it's not one, the walker doesn't depend on the action of walking, separately an act a walker, so he's got to have some action of walking separate from the action of walking that's that he's supposed to be doing. So again, it's kind of a bit of a puzzle to get your mind around, but there's sort of there seems to be kind of a very valid argument to these Madhyamaka masters, so we should make the effort. So Budapalita, content here to dismiss all clinging to inherent existence. I'm just going back to the text now, in the middle of page 1131. Budapalita, content to dismiss all clinging to inherent existence, concludes, therefore, in many cases, the being gone on does not possess going. Since going is not tenable on the gone on, the not yet gone on, and the being gone on, going is simply non-existent. So Budapalita feels it's proved, if we started off at the beginning of the chapter, it's proved that there's no going on that which has been gone on, and there's no going on that which is yet to be gone on. And now he's just proved with this argument there's no going on the being gone on. And so going is simply non-existent. Which it sounds like he's refuting going altogether. Tsongkhapa's not kind of confused by that. He just says these criticisms are criticisms of the opponent system. They can't present going. But we who can do this, trick of conventional imputation, we can present going, so no problem. So, but Budapalita, the Nagarjuna approach is like very devastating. It's just to refute the opponent, and going is simply non-existence. There is no arising, no ceasing, no coming, no going. Tsongkhapa, on the other hand, shows that how these criticisms do not apply to our own system's presentation of going, arising, and so forth. They're saying there is room for the going where you don't insist on inherent existence, and everything fits into place. We do not say that the action of going that applies to the goer is objectively other than the goer. We're saying the same nature, right? So if it were objectively other, it would have to be inherently established as different entity, a separate entity, existing by way of its own power, not dependent upon some other entity. So the action not dependent on the agent not dependent on the action. But we don't say that. Rather, we say that it is the going, that is the going by the possession of which he is termed as a goer. Yeah? The going is the one independent of which he is termed as a goer. So that's mutual dependence. And for us, it's no problem. I mean, the opponent maybe wants to accept the mutual dependence. They say we accept mutual dependence here, But if they do, then they have to give up the position of inherent existence. You can't have them being, you know, one dependent on the other and inherent existent. So that's you know, that's kind of refuting their inherent existence, even though they don't want to accept it. They want to accept, yeah, that he's a goer by virtue of his action of going and so forth. But once they accept that, you know, their idea that everything has to be inherent existence, you know, just weakens and cracks up. So when we investigate if there is no going objectively other than the goer, how could there be one who is a goer by possessing a self-characterized action of going? There could not be. There's no going objectively other than the goer. So then how could there be one who is a goer by possessing a self-characterized action of going? So we don't need to get into the mess that they're into, you know. If the going is objectively other than the goer, then the goer has to be a goer somehow with his own internal act of going or something. And then there's still the action of going over there, you know, that is unrelated to and is inherently existent. So then you've got these two actions of going, and you know, that's just, we don't get into that mess. In other words, a goer is only goer in dependence upon an act of going and a place or a path that is gone on. So all these three are mutually dependent on each other. In fact, a goer, not being a goer from his own side in any way, is at most only a goer in the perspective of the observer who sees the connection between action and agent. The action of going in the same way inevitably requires someone or something that is going in order for it to occur, and an observer to posit it as happening. Yeah, so that's you know, kind of forcing you to examine about what does it mean about this, the goer and the going and the gone on, the road that is gone on, and how they have to be mutually interdependent. Which hopefully it's like forcing us to kind of be more kind of acquainted with that view, that dependence, and then, you know, contrast that with the inherent existence, and we have to give up inherent existence. So if we can think about this argument, it's, you know, it's another kind of nail in the coffin for inherent existence. But if you've got any questions, please ask. Yes.
Different entities.
Purpose shock. So here's somebody like Jimber is asking, are you on the screen as well? Oh, you can hear him because he's on the screen. Yeah. Well, no, I don't say Purpose said that. He's just, when he's talking about 3 times in this presentation of middling topics in the cause and effect chapter, which, you know, quite a few of us have done a bit of study on that. So then you get this list of things about what he thinks is arising, or what he thinks is we can accept as existent, what is not existent, you know. Smoke which is arising, so he said that doesn't exist, you know, and sort of things like that. So he doesn't say that the sprout and the arising have to be different entities. But yeah, if the arising is something the sprout does before it exists, then it should be like the cause of the sprout, isn't it? But I don't think Purpose actually says that.
From our point of view, if we use Nagarjuna's eyes, we could say that the sprout and the arising could be the same entity, because if we say that it's just a seasoned seed that can be seen as an arising sprout, we could say that they are simultaneous and the same entity.
The arising and the sprout, or this. I don't think we could accept the arising of sprout and sprout are the simultaneous. I don't see how we could accept that. Yeah, the walking and the act of walking could be simultaneous, but the arising is different. We're looking through Nagarjuna's eyes. I don't think we could say that the arising, if it were there, would be with the sprout. But the sprout has to do it. And that's the problem, you see. The sprout doesn't exist at the time when he's supposed to be doing it. performing its function. Right, Thomas? That's the next argument coming up, you know, or the next note is about that. So that's another problem. I thought I've got it sorted out, but better when I get there, I probably will lose my confidence again. Now, what Purbacek was saying that's different from Tom Carper is saying, Purbacek saying there's no such thing as an arising sprout, but he means there's no common locus of sprout and arising. Nothing which is a sprout and arising, because if it is a sprout, it's already arisen. So there's no sprout that's doing the act of arising, you know, in the sense that there's a common locus of a sprout and arising. But Tom Carper, he's saying, yeah, well, what we mean by arising sprout is what Hannele said, something which when it has arisen, it will be a sprout. When we think about it like that, then oh yeah, there's an arising sprout. But it's, you know, there's no sprout which is rising from its own side. It's only sprouts only at the end of the action. So, you know, we have to posit it like, I think. It's impossible for inherently existent guys. They should be there doing its own arising. Right? Anyway, that's not this argument at the moment, so we won't go into that. Yeah, but it forces you to think of the act that he's only a walker by doing the act of walking. Yeah, so he's not a walker from his own side. Any other questions, by the way? Don't hesitate to ask. Come on. Yes, Sandru is asking now.
You analyze the arising and the sprout. The arising of the sprout happens before the sprout actually exists.
Yeah.
It's very hard to actually arise, you know, sprout doesn't exist yet, so it's arising them by non-sprout. It seems that there's not enough basis to say the arising of sprout exists. You don't find something really that is supporting that at the very time. It's supported by something later, okay, but it's not really supported at the time. So I'm not sure if that is what we mean with lack of an existence. You know, do we mean that all phenomena exist like that? That there is no actually there's that which is doing the thing. Because for me, if I think about it, it's quite difficult to differentiate how does something exist or does not exist. It's really difficult to find the middle.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that. That was Sandru asking a question, but he's not hooked into the Zoom link. So, but he's worrying about this one about the arising and the sprout. So the sprout doesn't occur until after till the end of the act of arising a sprout. So how can you say it's the arising of a sprout then? It's like there isn't. What's the basis on which you say that this is the arising of a sprout? But that's kind of the imputation. You know, we are saying that it is the arising of a sprout just purely on the basis of our, you know, previous experience and our expertise, you know, or our, you know, familiarity. Let's say familiarity with seeds and sprouts. Yeah? So we see the seed, you know, swelling and changing. Oh, well, the sprouts are rising now. There's the water and warmth and everything it needs to become a sprout. And look, you know, there's it's absorbing water and changing shape, and you know there'll be a sprout there in the next 24 hours or 36 hours or something. So we're just talking from our own experience. So that's merely imputed arising. See, so the picture of the earth is to be really arising. It's got to be there and doing its action. You know. Supporter and supporter being inherently existent they both have to be simultaneous. And like we said with Jimpa said, you know, previously we talked about this. What's happening? Is it the disintegration of a sprout? Is it the disintegration of a seed or the arising of a sprout? So what's actually happening? What's really there? Well, it's up to you. You know, you can see it as a disintegration, or you can see it as arising, the action, depending on your agenda, depending on where you're coming from. Some people can see it as the disintegration of a seed, and that's quite correct. Some people see it as the rising of a sprout, and that's also correct. It's not like they are incompatible. But if things were inherently existent, the inherently existent act of disintegration, how could that be an act of arising? If it inherently disintegrating, it wouldn't be arising. If it's inherently disintegrating, then how can it be arising as well? Depends on your interpretation. See, is it ice melting or water arising? It just depends on your point of view. Wrong one's right, so it's very much showing you that the invitational nature, conventional nature, is what's happening in the perspective of the person. But it's very puzzling, isn't it? Yeah, it's like, some people, in a simpler example, you can see two people can have different preferences. I like the taste of that food; it's very tasty, nice food. But another person tastes that food, and I hate the taste of those things. That food, I don't like that taste. So for one person it's pleasant, one person it's unpleasant. Completely subjective. We understand all that. But in these cases of arising and so on, it's more. It's harder to get it to sink into your mind and accept it, for sure. But this one, like the walker and the act of walking, or the walker, the act of walking, and the place that's being walked upon. Yeah, they all require each other. So how do we say somebody's a walker? It's like we just see them doing the act of walking, right? So that only by dependence on the act of walking we say that person's a walker. There's no question of there being some sort of inherently existent walker, though. Is that we are positing him to be a walker by way of his association with a certain action. But put it the other way around, well, there couldn't be such an action without an agent, So you can't have the action of walking without a walker. How do you know it's an action of walking? Well, because there's somebody doing it. Yeah, you look at the person, moving their legs in that certain way. They say, oh, there's an action of walking going on there. So the action of walking can only be posited in dependence upon the fact of this agent who's doing it. So each of the two require the other, the action and the agent. So that's if you understand that correctly, that's really like an entrance into emptiness to think like that. The guy is not a walker from his own side, he's not an eater from his own side, he's not a singer from his own side. He's not a sleeper from his own side, he's not a sitter from his own side. Everything that person does is just independence upon actions. Yeah, so independence upon something, the sort of dependently arisen, independence upon other factors, other circumstances. So you say, oh, we take all those factors away, or take away all those actions, but there's a person there, isn't there? The person's still there from their own side. But is he? Is it a person who's never doing any action? Any person doing the action of breathing, or the action of thinking or sleeping or something.
Is it Graham? I'm just wondering, you said something like a walker is basically a walker to the outside observer. So isn't the walker a walker to himself or herself? Yes,
I mean that's the observer could be the person who's actually doing the walker. He or she could be doing the walking, and they're thinking like that. Or it could be somebody watching them from the outside, which is how I was describing it. Yeah, the person thinks about themselves. It's in the end, it comes to the same thing, I would think.
But if a walker is not thinking of themselves as walking, then they are not a walker to themselves.
Well, if they're just doing the action sort of more or less automatically, which we can do, it's so familiar. If they're not thinking I'm walking now, there could be the situation, the time when they're not thinking I'm walking, and not regarding themselves as a walker. Yeah. That's good.
Then they are not a walker.
Because they're not a walker because they're not being imputed as a walker, or they're not being what regarded as a walker, posited by any mind. Yeah.
Even though they are walking, they are not walkers.
No, but if you say they're walking, then they must be a walker.
I don't know.
Walking, not be
Confused.
mute. She's gone on mute.
Can I ask a question, please?
Well, okay, but we've got to answer the Hannah's question a bit more. But
Oh, sorry, I thought you'd answered it.
have I done? Nobody's imputing them person as a walker. You know, the guys or the lady who's walking is not thinking I'm walking. Nobody else around watching them, thinking or observing them doing that as they're walking. Like no, even a dog is looking at them as they're walking early in the morning. The park, there's nobody else there. So are they a walker or not? There's nobody to impute them as a walker.
Before we called it America.
Yeah, it can be imputed later. That person can remember I was in the park and what was I doing? I was walking. So at that point I was a walker then. They can think about it later. Don't think the imputation has to come along at the same time. And you know, if you admit that they are doing the act of walking, even though nobody's taking any notice, but you admit that they're doing the act of walking, that you set up the situation, so you describe them as doing an act of walking, then they're a walker. Walking depends upon the act of walking. They are a walker. And there is somebody thinking about it, us. But it doesn't have to be at the same time, exactly the same time as they're walking. And if nobody ever imputed them to be walking, then it would just be an open question, wouldn't it? Were they a walker or not? Well, nobody ever saw them. Nobody ever asked them. Nobody ever took a photograph. So
I don't quite understand if the imputation can come later, then when the action was happening, what was it at that time?
Well, if nobody knew it was actually walking, they would just say, "Oh, they're doing an action." We don't know what action it was. They were doing an action, wouldn't they?
But I mean, I don't know. And anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I mean that's I mean, I remember my teacher asking me, he said, you know, it was raining or something. So, you know, the monsoon in India, southern India or something like that. So I said, oh, raining now. So how many drops of rain are falling then? I said, well, that's more or less uncountable, even if you just take the area of the monastery. And I never mind the whole area. It won't be raining kind of quite a long area, but if you just took the area of the monastery, because Drepung is a big monastery, of course. So how many drops of rain are falling? So that's, well, it's sort of hard to say, isn't it? There's so many. He says, yeah, well, there must be an exact number, right? But who's imputing that number? Who's imputing the actual number of rainfall, the drops that fell, you know, like 500 billion and 66 or something, you know? Who's counting them? Who's imputing how many? Well, nobody, because nobody's counting. Nobody could count. I mean, Buddha could count them, but, you know, you can't just keep on relying on him all the time. He's not got a conceptual mind, does he? He doesn't impute, right? So he's not a conceptual case. So all you would say is like all you'd impute there are very many drops, right? Very many, a very large number. And that would be it. That'd be the limit of reality at that point. No, but there must be an exact number. There must be an exact number of drops that did fall, you know, 56.5 billion or something, plus 66. So we say, well, there was an exact number of drops that fell. There was an exact number. But we can't impute how many, but still it was an exact number, a rather large number. So they still all fell. Even if nobody ever counted them. So does somebody have to impute exactly everything, every little detail that happens? Oh, he's walking, yeah. So he must be a walker. Well, how far did he walk? Well, nobody ever knows because he didn't measure how far he walked himself or herself. Nobody else came along afterwards and measured it with a big measure. So how far did he walk? Well, there must have been an exact distance that he did walk, but nobody measured it. But there was a distance, so he walked the distance that he walked. So that's enough. We don't have to impute just because he walked, exactly 2.5 miles. We don't have to impute that he walked 2.5 miles. It's just he just walked wherever he walked, and we impute that he walked from this point to that point, and nobody measured how long it was. But it was a certain distance. But did he walk a certain distance? Yes. Did he walk an exact distance? Yes. How far was it? Well, we don't know, but we can impute that he walked from A to B. I don't know what I'm talking about. You got a question there, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, it was only about the function of emptiness in a way. Well, the idea that if you know that someone is an imputed jogger, I don't understand why that's supposed to remove suffering, because if it's a valid base, it's a valid base, and there's still a jogger, viably there. And whether or not a knife is imputed, it's still going to cut me. Whether or not lava is imputed, I'm still going to burn alive in it. So I don't quite always get the extension. I mean, unless the only way I can really not the only way, but a way that it seems to make sense to me is if the idea of imputation is much more profound or mysterious or extreme than we might think. So that if emptiness makes everything disappear, then what everything must be appearing right now must be a total delusion, which is also quite a freaky thought. So don't understand why knowing it's imputed removes suffering, unless there's a deeper level going on how imputation works, basically. Well, that could be a conversation for another time, I guess.
Say that again. Say the last bit again.
I don't understand how knowing that something's imputed can remove suffering, unless there's something more extreme going on with imputation, something more mysterious, if that makes sense.
Well, it ought to make a difference, yeah. Like if you get angry with somebody, I mean, I always think of the example where I used to get angry with my father when he was very old, and try to look after him. I didn't get angry very often. It wasn't like a kind of, a totally sort of negative time or anything, but just occasionally you'd get really irritated. And that was because you'd forgotten the dependently arisen nature of the situation, as I keep trying to explain, If you remember the dependent arising, you wouldn't get angry, you'd be patient. And obscuring the dependent arising nature and grasping him into be inherently an unworthy, despicable, silly old man or something, by whatever his own powers is useless, and I'm stuck with him. Then you get really fed up, and I haven't got to bother with this, why can't he do this? It's useless, and I'm able to clear up all the mess. Then you have to put him down in that low position if he's really a kind of a pathetic old person, just by that's his very nature or something. That's his kind of he's inherently despicable, let's say. Not that this is an old man, but he's inherently pathetic. He's inherently something beneath you, inherently bad, sort of thing. But if you remember the dependently arisen nature of the situation, you remember, oh, he's my dad, you know. He looked after me when I was a kid, you know, and he used to take me and give me a bath every week and stuff like that. And, you know, he'd be going to work and working hard and bringing home the wage packet. And, you know, quite a portion of that wage packet be spent on me, buying me some new shoes and things like that. You know, and then I think, oh, well, I'm going to be like that when I'm old. If I get as old as him, I'll be going demented, you know. I'll be cracking up. I'll be pathetic. I won't even be able to sign my name anymore. I remember that when it was he used to write, you know, he'd pay by check. So he was always used to paying by check. He didn't have a credit card, I don't think. And then he came to the time when he couldn't even sign his own name on the check, right? Like his hand had lost its ability to, you know, even sign your own name. Imagine how kind of appalling that is. You know, so you kind of sympathy for a guy like that. And if you remember the dependent reason nature, then you don't get angry. You just sort of think, well, he's given me such a great time in my life, you know, given me such a great start in my life and everything, blah, 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 blah. So I just would like to be kind to him as kind of in gratitude.
That seems.
Sorry, I haven't finished yet. Sorry. So you're imputing him to be unworthy and worthy, or, you know, just a suitable object for, you're useless, you know, anger, you know, oh, yeah, you're just worse than me, you know. And you've got to feel that. I'm making you feel bad, you know, because I'm thinking you're worse than me, and I'm telling you. That's what the anger means, isn't it? That I despise you, you know. But how is it? Like, that's just is any bad person or a, you know, despicable person or kind of, you know, pathetic person in the perspective of your present confusion. It's a merely imputed bad person. It's not an actual bad person. Yeah, so then if you understand that, then the badness that is just loading on him is coming from your mind. You're the one who's loading him on as being a bad person. He's not a bad person. He was a very good person. Actually, he never did bad things. He was like always trying to help people and kind of, you know, go to church and be on the committee and do all the things that everybody else wanted to do, like, you know, those things. You know, he was always there. So he wasn't a bad person at all, but you're just loading him, you're painting him as bad by the power of your own, you know, agenda, your own afflictions. See what I mean? So the badness is all coming from your mind. So when you see that, then you stop getting hassled. Yeah, you don't get taken in by your afflicted, you know, scornful attitude towards him. You see, that's just, oh, that's like it's being angry with somebody in a dream. There's no object of anger that's worthy there. You're just getting angry with your own shadow, your own projection. Like he's a good person. So that's how the afflictions, if you understand emptiness and things are really imputed, then the afflictions can dissolve a bit.
Isn't that like a mistaken object, though? He's a good man by relative terms, so imputing him to be bad is just incorrect. So someone who is about to say, I don't know, do something pretty, like a serial killer, you know, you can't get around that by saying, oh, my perception of him, I should remember the goodness that they've done. That seems like a different example of dependent arising, but
Look, maybe the serial killer was your mother in the previous life, and maybe she fed you with mother's milk and all that. Why not?
yeah,
that person's been in every relationship to you in previous lives. So the fact that they are, you know, trying to come kill you with a knife right now doesn't mean they haven't been really kind to you in a previous life.
yeah, but that still seems like more like you're just trying to reason away something that could or could not be true. But dependent arising itself, just I guess, the object less obvious or something.
Well, yeah, okay, don't worry about previous lives. He's got Buddha nature, yeah. He's a human being who's just like got the potential to become Buddha, and he's just screwed up with lots of, you know, he's probably abused in his childhood, or he was like, you know, kind of born with a defective brain or something, with excess of chemicals of this, that, and the other, and therefore he's doomed to like be very aggressive, not because he wants to be or because he hates you or like, you know, but it's just like compelled by his malfunctioning brain chemistry or something. Why get angry with him? Like he's just doomed. He's like a victim, yeah, a victim. So you got to stop him killing yourself. You got to stop him killing other people. That might mean you have to be very violent to him, because the only way to stop him is by violent means. You don't get angry with him. You don't kind of, your afflictions don't flare up. You just say, oh dear, what a pathetic, case, and do something really quick. But you don't have this fog of, oh, I hate the guy because he's coming at me with a knife, That's not going to help you deal with it skillfully. Yeah, and so then, Nagarjuna is trying to say, well, there's an emptiness of phenomena as well. It's not just the person who's empty. All phenomena are empty. All phenomena are like phenomena in dreams, So he's just trying to broaden it out to this really vast, Mahayana type of approach, yeah. So here's like, we're trying to, refute the selfness of phenomena now, which these lower schools don't really believe in, you see. They might say there's some sort of selfness of persons. But all phenomena without, characteristics. All phenomena are, without arising and ceasing. They're not they're stainless, and they're not without stain, They're kind of, deficient, not fulfilled. All those things in the Heart Sutra, you see. So then the mind kind of really, then they start to see that the reality we're living now is some kind of, whatever, some sort of bad dream. I don't know how you want to call it, some sort of compulsive, knee-jerk reaction of suffering, out of our confusion. So then, then the sort of voidness that you get when you realize emptiness starts to look very, you want to dwell there and learn all about it, and then gradually you'll be able to cut off your compulsion to create, situations where you're suffering again. You really penetrate emptiness very deeply. It's not like cancelling out conventional truth, but it's saying how conventional truth doesn't have to be, the trip of, compulsive suffering anymore. Wow, that's all I know. So if I'm only a walker by my virtue of my act of walking, I'm only a sleeper by virtue of my act of sleeping, I'm only a breather by my act of breathing. So what am I in and of myself? And is there anything left? That thing that doesn't depend on an action. And that thing doesn't depend on any part. We've had that one. We think about that one more. Who is that person who doesn't depend on any parts, and that's there when you take all the parts away? Well, nothing. So then you take all the actions away that the person that you do, then what's left? Again, you come to, well, what is actually there? What's really there? That's, the person that doesn't depend upon something else, like the actions they're doing or the parts that they have or something. Absolutely nothing. It's void. It's good to remember that and think about it. So then that's voidness. There's nothing there that existing by way of its own reality. Everything's only existing in dependence upon something else, and somebody seeing the connection and say, oh, look, he's doing the act of walking, therefore he's a walker. So it depends on somebody observing it too, What is he really in and of himself? What am I really in and of myself? And then you get to that point and they say, well, there's nothing. So that's voidness, you see. So no inherent existence arising, but then no person's arising, is there either? At the ultimate level, there's no person. There's no person that's got any ultimate kind of way of existing. So when you realize voidness, no person will appear to your mind. No inherent existence will appear to your mind, but no person will appear to your mind. And then even this idea that there's a subject observing an object, that will also subside, yeah? Because they're conventional categories, right? Subject, object. They only exist on the conventional level. When you get to the ultimate level, There's never any sense of, oh, I'm looking at emptiness now, or, you know, so the emptiness is affecting me as I'm experiencing it. Of course, that would be a conventional, you know, existent thing, which is on the ultimate level, it's not found. So even subject and object dissolve. So then emptiness is really, you know, proper a realization of emptiness is non-dual. So there's no subject, no object. So there's no appearance of any of those conventionals. Just voidness. It's not somebody looking at voidness, it's just voidness. Hey, it's time to stop, man. Going on too long. Anyway, had a bit of discussion tonight. That was nice. Not just me talking. Okay, so that's the idea of there would be two goings or two arisings, two actions. So that's the second argument of that. Okay then. Nice to see you all.